second from Lana. How's the volume? Good?
Good.
I'm used to being loud, so.
Good.
Cool. All right. So good morning, everybody. Appreciate you being here. I know it's a fun topic. I'll try to keep my dad jokes and puns that I'm known for to a minimum. I know it's a serious topic. So happy to take questions as I go along. So feel free to shout. Mike, my name's pretty easy to remember. So if you have a question while I'm going through, please don't hesitate to jump in and ask. I love answering questions. So even though we're all hazards, I'm going to focus primarily on hurricanes. So at least for hurricane season, we say, you might see in some of our materials 96 hours. I like to say a little bit more than that. I like to say a week. At least during Irma for me, I had a little better experience during Ian and Irma, for me anyway. I didn't have power for 8 days. So, and then only about 2 days for Ian. So we need to be prepared for, especially if we're not evacuating, if we're staying in town, we need to know what we're signing up for, what that involves. And so if you are planning to stay, you need to be ready to kind of have what you need for, I would say, at least a week. So, some of the things that we'll cover, I won't get too geeky with you on weather, but I'll talk a little bit about some weather information and our monthly considerations. I'll talk a lot. Most of this is going to be about local information and some of the resources that we have here locally. Again, as we go through, I know a lot. I've been here 10 years now, so I've gotten to learn a lot about this community, so please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to answer more. So some of the topics that we'll cover are evacuations and sheltering. We'll talk about pet preparedness. Not sure if any of you have pets, but we'll at least cover that. We'll talk about the special needs program, what that is and what that isn't. We'll cover a bit about reentry and then other post-storm considerations. Okay, so that's kind of a little snapshot of where we're going to go. So I always use this visual to show this is a collection of all the various tropical storms, depressions, hurricanes, and so forth in about a 150-year period. That's not for this year, so don't get too excited. That is just a historical. So they happen here is the gist of this slide. We need to be ready for them. They are unpredictable. I used to use Erica, but then when Irma came, that one got a little crazy too as well. These are just all the different projected paths throughout its lifespan. So things can change. So if we see something that's way out near Africa and it's so far showing toward us, it can change, just wait. So personally, I don't trust forecasts more than a week out. And even at a week, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And even within a few days, there's uncertainty. So both with Charlie and now Ian, we saw significant changes. Everybody thought, oh, Ian's heading to Tampa Bay, not our problem, right? That changed for us. So we need to be watching these as these things can change. So storm surge, unfortunately, we learned quite the lesson with Ian and how storm surge works. Up this way, you had a little bit more impact than, say, further down south and have a little bit better understanding of this. But if Ian had made landfall more closer to Collier County as opposed to Lee County, unfortunately it might have looked a little bit more like what Lee County experienced in Fort Myers Beach and nearby. So what we ask you to do, knowing the hazards here, is just to have a plan, have an idea of what you have planned for your actions, for your, are you going for your decision making once the time comes. So, of course, when should we plan? Now is a great time. Obviously, hurricane season started June 1. I'll show you with some different graphics here how things start to pick up starting next month and even more so in August, September, and even into October. When does hurricane season end? November 30th. Didn't know you were going to come here for trivia today, did you? Wildfire season. So obviously wildfires are perhaps a little less of a concern here, but I do these talks all over the community, so I always make sure we're talking about wildfire season as well. Tornadoes. So I got a funny email from somebody yesterday that didn't realize that we get tornadoes down here. I sent out this cool GIS story map that the National Weather Service developed about the EF2 tornado that occurred in Palm Beach Gardens. And so people are like, wow, EF2s happen here? It's like, yeah, there was one that just happened in Cape Coral not too long ago. So we don't get them frequently. They're usually EF0s. A lot of them are actually water spouts that maybe you see on the water that dissipate before they come on land. Sometimes they do maintain that vorticity once they reach land. Long story short here is tornadoes can happen. We need to be ready for that. And so I've got some brochures about Alert Collier, which is one means that you can get notifications about tornado watches and warnings and prepare accordingly. We also talk about other hazards too, terrorism, hazmat. Again, I'm here to talk hurricanes today, but we're an all-hazard shop. We plan for a little bit of everything. So who should you be planning for? Obviously you and anybody that lives within your household, whether that's an apartment, condo, a house, whatever your situation is. Any pets that you might have. Making sure that your family members, I can't tell you how many calls we get into our emergency operations center where they'll say, I haven't heard from my sister or my aunt or my cousin or this, because there wasn't that good communication path. So whether you're planning to stay or if you're planning to go, please, I ask you to make sure you're communicating your plans to others. We really want to focus our calls not necessarily on connecting people. Certainly if there's an emergency, we want to do that, but we want to spend more of our time on actions as opposed to kind of checking in if there's no real issue involved. And then neighbors and friends. So, you know, the good old days where community was a little bit tighter and people would talk to each other, we need to be talking to one another. I will tell you that I've got a group of pals that I call on, because once we get into this mode, I'm busy. So I have a network of buddies that'll come by and put the shutters up for me so my wife doesn't have to worry about it. My 5-year-old isn't trying to put them up himself. My dog and cat, they're not involved in it either. So make sure you're having some good chats with others around you. You know, use Team. You've got other resources that can help you in planning for these. So I'll just kind of blitz through these a little bit. So storms in May are very infrequent here in June, and obviously we're the last day of June now, kind of quieter, but then July starts to pick up a little, and especially in August. This does not mean, I'm not telling you you can hit the snooze button in May, June, and July. It's just a consideration for you to know that things tend to pick up, particularly in August, September, and October. So the nice thing about the ones, and not really nice, but the more convenient thing, I guess is a better way to say it, for the storms that are June to kind of the September time frame, is that they typically form closer to Africa, and we get to watch them, and they do their little dance. We get to kind of see where is it going, and we have more time to plan. Now what gets me nervous more in the September, the October, and the November time frame is that these storms tend to start developing more toward the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, which closer proximity and some other atmospherics I won't get into, they tend to happen faster. So we have less time to get that message out, to get people moved, to set up shelters, to do all the things that we need to make sure that folks are taken care of during these. So once we get past July and August, maybe even to September, don't take your foot off the accelerator and say, hey, we're good, you know, this season wasn't too bad. We're not out of it yet. An interesting fact, all the storms that have made landfall in the continental United States as a Category 5, within 3 days they went from a tropical storm to a Category 5. 3 days. So that includes Hurricane Michael now. That's the most recent example of that. So these things can intensify very quickly. Don't look at the news and it says, oh, it's a tropical storm right now. It may change. So at least that, as a planning assumption for us, if they tell us that they're forecasting it to be a Cat 2, we're thinking Cat 3. That's just how we plan. Any questions? Okay. So outside of season, just giving some factoids here. So May of 1916, if you saw the one that was in May, that was a tropical storm. That was quite a while ago. Tropical storms in December and February, and then recently in January of 2016, Hurricane Alex. That was an interesting one. Never came close to the continental United States. The short story here is they can happen outside of season, but they're very, very, very rare. Typically, they're not that strong. So everybody asks, what are the numbers this year, Mike? I don't care about the numbers. But I will tell you anyway, because maybe you do care. So this is the information that the Colorado State University sent out about the named storms being 13, hurricanes at 6, major hurricanes at 2. So they are just at or right under average. So don't let that change your perception of your planning this season. I don't care if they tell me there's only going to be one named storm this year. That may come to us. So I don't buy into this hype. I already told you earlier, I don't trust anything more than a week out. This is done in like March or April. How can they tell us about what's going to happen in Collier County in September, October, all the way in March or May or April? I know atmospherics kind of help with, this is just for the whole basin. This does not give a picture or a snapshot on what to expect here in Florida, okay? Any questions on that? I'm going to tell you Mike's opinion as I go along with this, so whether you like it or not, I'll try to be, nice about it. So the message, of course, with storm surge being the big, big concern for us, we always tell folks to run from the water and to hide from the wind. We've learned a lot from Hurricane Andrew and other past events that building codes are much better. These buildings are very resilient to wind. What we're most worried about, of course, is storm surge and water. What we don't want to forget about is also precipitation. So I sent another GIS story map for an event April 12th, I believe it was, in Fort Lauderdale, where they received 25 inches of rain. 25 inches of rain. And of course, we have a little less concrete. We're trying to catch up, it seems, but there's a lot of concrete over there, not a lot of places for the water to go. And so they had some pretty significant issues with flooding and rescues and getting people out. So that is not out of the realm of possibility of occurring here. Perhaps not as bad, but still bad enough that I would be very busy during that, and hopefully you would be paying attention and taking appropriate actions. So, as I stated with the week, we need to be prepared also for perhaps hours or even days where the folks that were used to coming when we call 911 may not be able to get to you. We are not going to put them in danger if the winds are still significant. If a storm parks and we've still got 150 mile per hour winds that are just sitting here, they will not go out in that. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to have to hang out, you're going to have to address your own boo-boos and not feeling good. That's going to be on you. We're not going to be able to get folks out to you. So just be prepared with a good first aid kit and kind of know what to expect. Make sure you have plenty of medications and so forth. So our evacuation decisions. My mom is in New York, but this is mom. Maximum of maximums. Different moms. So the maximum of maximum is before even Ian or Irma took place, they would send us studies of the worst case scenarios for different storms that could happen here in Southwest Florida. Now, if you think that I believe that Immokalee could get water, I'm a little skeptical. However, that's what the science tells us, and that's what we have to plan for. So I think Ian kind of opens some eyes to some people that maybe it's more realistic, but there's still, of course, a little skepticism I have on going all the way out to Immokalee. But you never know, and so I'm never going to say it could never happen. I'll never say that. And so even when some of these projections show my home, which is kind of in the middle of Naples, I never want to be the guy on the news that didn't listen to his own, practice what you preach, right? So I elevate, I do everything that I'm supposed to at my home, regardless of any skepticism I might have. So we base our decisions, or our planning off of that, but then during the actual event, we talk to the National Hurricane Center twice a day, and we also have somebody from the National Weather Service Miami usually that's sent directly to us. So the National Hurricane Center will give kind of the overall brush, and then the National Weather Service Miami will help us with more specific information, like the winds should get to Goodland or Immokalee or whatever place by this time, should exit by this time. We think that the storm surge is going to be greatest here. You know, they'll give us some more specific information.
This area across the street from us where they're putting in a golf course, that's all cleared of trees, bushes, everything. Would that make a difference when the hurricane comes, you know, over to this area, do you think?
I can't give you a scientific answer. I would imagine it might have a little impact, but as long as we're not paving everything like other areas, where at least there's places to drain, and we've got great stormwater systems here, I can't answer that in a definitive manner. It may have some impact, but I don't know how much. You'd have to ask somebody that's more in the environmental or in stormwater for that information. So again, we get those calls twice a day. We also have some other tools that we rely on. One's HurrEvac and others HurTrack that we have access to, and we can do different potentials. So even if they don't say it's coming to us, we can say, if it does come to us, what would this storm look like? We can do some things like that just to be even more prepared. After Hurricane Irma, we instituted evacuation zones. We did use them during Hurricane Ian, and so the Alpha zone is the one that we evacuated for Ian, which pretty much lined up with what the storm surge issue was. So we're not patting our back there. We never want to be excited about that. We're just glad that we had something that worked. So we always ask folks to be familiar with zones, and once we say your zone, it's not telling you that it's going to happen, but there's that potential that worries us, and we ask you to leave it or elevate.
So what zone are we? I say A.
Absolutely, it's A.
And another one, where is your house? You referenced where you
I'm
live?
in Zone C.
Zone C.
Yep. The yellow.
Oh, okay.
So, yes.
Yeah, where is this property in relation to the red patch?
We are right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so right in A zone. So the one thing I do want to say now that I don't, we've had Irma and Ian recently, and they've both been pretty significant storms in different ways. Doesn't mean that the next storm is going to be as bad. So it could, but the probabilities typically are that we're going to have some weaker stuff for a while and then potentially have another strong one down the road. That could be next year, that could be 15 years, that could be 100 years, and we don't know. So the one thing to keep in your mind is not every storm will be the same as one storm that you had recently. Every storm's different, and that's no lie. So people are like, what shelter are you going to open next year? We don't know. It depends on where the storm is coming, how bad it is, so forth. So don't have a perception of what a storm is going to be. Be ready to be flexible and to know that we'll send the information that we are receiving out so that you could make a good decision. Yes?
Your map is horizontal. Is it vertical? That is, if you're 12 stories up, does the same
It
risk
does
apply?
not factor that in.
Because FEMA, makes you build up to a certain height above
This
13
is,
feet.
no, this does not factor in any mitigation that is done. This is street level consideration.
And so, if there's an evacuation order, does it apply?
If you're still in that zone, depending on storm surge, we don't know how long that storm surge will stay. So if you're comfortable staying for multiple days where people won't get to you, that's on you, that's your decision. We're not gonna, you still have some decision autonomy here where you can say, I'm prepared for this. But we're going to strongly encourage anybody that's in that evacuation zone that if they're not prepared for that, it's best to just go somewhere else for a little bit. A little inconvenience for some peace of mind.
We hear about evacuations, and some of them are voluntary, and then there's a mandatory evacuation.
I will get to that.
All right,
I've got a visual for it too.
okay.
So, just before, because we're getting close to that exact slide, I promise I'll get to your question. So first we've got Irma, and then Ian. Now, granted that these visuals are a little different, if you look at the two, you'll see a lot of similarity in the forecasts for Ian and Irma. So during Irma, if that storm had gone to the west of the peninsula, we could have seen very similar impacts during Irma as we did during Ian. But because Irma made landfall near Marco Island and Goodland, instead of passing by us, they got the brunt of it. And then also there were some things that happened with the back end of the storm. It lost a little bit of its luster, fortunately. So you can see some similarities. So these graphics do work per se. All right, so what I'll also tell you though, and here's your slide, is that these decisions are made based on risk, not on, we're not Nostradamus, we don't know what's going to happen, we can only guess based on what the meteorologists are telling us, okay? So anything that's in the 60 to 100% is a margin of danger. If you're 60% likely to get storm surge of a certain footage, you're in an area where that's a big risk, right? Margin of safety, that doesn't mean that you're good and stay. You've got a little bit more wiggle room in your decision. It's more on you to figure out, do I want to go or stay? The official forecast that the National Weather Service pumps out is based on roughly 50%. So give or take in that 40 to 60% range. Now the visuals that you see are at 10% probability. So that means 9 out of 10 times what you see may not happen. But we don't ever want to bank on that because that 10%, in other words, we would rather you be angry at us for a little inconvenience because there's the potential of something happening, rather than us to say, you'll probably be okay. And then when you're not, suddenly you're like, you kept us here and now it was an awful time or I lost somebody. We never want to be the bad person on that end of it. We'd rather be a little bit more cautious and inconvenience you to go elsewhere, knowing you'll generally be fine. Okay?
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
I know that a lot of the high rises down the coast, down more toward Naples, had damage in their basements from the flooding,
Yes.
storm surge. So it put out their elevators. So people who live,
Those are considerations for
Higher.
elevators. So even if you're higher,
Yeah.
now you can't get down.
right,
So if you have mobility issues and you're not good with stairs, might not be a fun time for you. We might have to use some means of getting you down that you might not like. So there's a lot of factors that we need to think about in staying. It's not just, will the water get to me? It's what are the impacts of water getting to where I live and how that's going to affect my personal situation. Don't let it scare you, because we know, we generally get information here that these are coming. And so we'll prompt you with, and I'll talk, so first, what we do here in Collier, my boss kind of started it, was we'll do voluntary precautionary evacuations. We started pumping out that message on Saturday during Ian. We never ended up doing the evacuations till Monday. But we prompted and gave the nudge on Saturday that we were working that direction. So listen for those, and if you have any nervousness and you have the means, then maybe chat with a friend that lives further inland, or maybe finding a hotel in advance before others scoop them up. If that's going to make you more comfortable, then by all means, that's why we do it. We allow you to make decisions on your own. Knowing things may change, so don't be angry at us. You know, it's got to be a push and pull here, where if you're wanting to act early, know that there's a potential things can change. So don't just, keep that in mind. Then we moved, I'll get to you. Then we move to voluntary evacuations. This is where it's kind of in that margin of safety that I showed you. And we're not telling you you have to go, but it's starting to look more toward moving toward a mandatory. Mandatory is where we think you really need to leave. We're not going to be able to drag you out the door with the word mandatory, but we're really not thinking it's smart for you to stay once we go to the mandatory. So voluntary, you probably should, but you kind of have that liberty to kind of make your own decision. Mandatory, we really think you need to go. Yes?
Well, so, I've got an iPhone, I never listen to the radio, I have a TV.
Sure.
You talk about, where are we gonna get these alerts?
The
And
best
where are we
thing
gonna get
to
the
do
information?
is to sign up for Alert Collier.
And what will that do, send something to a phone?
That will send out, we will send out messages to subscribers directly. You would still get it through social media or through the news or through the radio if you didn't. But the Alert Collier will go directly to your phone, to your email, however you want to set it up, so that we can send the message directly to you and say, these are the zones that we're evacuating. So you want to be familiar with what zone you're in. If you don't know, we know after talking that you're in A, but that we also have an app called 311. You can put your address in and it'll tell you what zone that you're in. Yes?
I forgot the question.
Okay.
I have one. Sometimes it comes on the television, it says it's an emergency, but it doesn't tell you what it is, what the emergency is.
We can't change what the media does or doesn't do. We ask them very nicely in meetings before these to do certain things, and, you know, it's like kids, they don't always listen. I have a 5-year-old, so I get it now.
What was our mandate in Ian? I know we stayed, most of the stadium.
Ian, mandatory for evacuation zone A.
It was mandatory?
Yes, it was.
We were here.
Yeah.
And okay.
Right, so, again, mandatory, we're not, putting you in cuffs and taking you out. We're just telling you, you probably should leave unless you're in a situation that makes sense for you, for your personal situation. Any other questions?
Usually they start in Africa, on the coast, did you say?
During June, they may. So we get a lot of systems, there will be these intense thunderstorms that start over Africa, they get over water, they start picking up a lot of moisture, they start building. We get to watch them do that dance across the Atlantic. However, that's not the only place that we need to watch. So there's actually two things that we look at. They're called the A-Bear box. It's spelled H-E-B-E-R-T. So there are two areas that once storms go through, they're typically ones that Florida needs to watch out for. So there's different times of seasons. I mean, I could get really weather geeky with you. Just stay tuned, listen to us. I like Mike's weather page, personally. It's not a government thing. It's run by a guy named Mike. He's got the same name as me, so he must be cool. But Mike's weather page is one place that I like to go, and tropicaltidbits.com is another one. So I don't know if you have a pen and if you even care. But those are two of the ones that I go to. That help? Okay. All right. So we've got, we typically have to look at where this storm is approaching. So if this part of the storm, which definitely during Ian, here's the peninsula of Florida, as it's going this way, we're going to have storm surge concerns because of the way that the storm spins. It spins counterclockwise. So then what we also saw as Ian was kind of hanging out near Lee County, the wind, since again it spins counterclockwise, the winds pushing in this way caused the storm surge to be pushing in toward the western coast. Now, we all know that force versus force causes issues. So since Lake Okeechobee drains south and towards us in some ways, Ian going this way, Okeechobee going that way, they met, and that caused even worse storm surge, even inland along Lockley Road, further east from here. So we need to know where rivers and canals and other things are as well when we're talking about storm surge. Typically also in this, where the red arrows are up here, this is typically where most of the tornadic activity was. Fortunately, we didn't have anything significant during Ian, but during Irma, a lot of people didn't know it. We actually had 2 tornadoes during Irma that occurred. They were very weak and short-lived and affected very small portions. One was completely unpopulated, and another was just a few homes. Didn't really make the news because it didn't hit enough homes apparently. But there were 2. So I love the media. Anyway, timing considerations. So some of the things that we need to think about certainly are medically frail. So our special needs shelter, we're more so marketing that this is for the oxygen dependent and electrically dependent folks. We can still get others on the special needs registry, but they are typically not as eligible. I'm not the medical person involved in that, so I'm just giving some of the information. If you have more questions, I could certainly hook you up with the right people. I know them and work with them. But we're typically looking at oxygen-dependent, electricity-dependent folks specifically for this special needs shelter. Other situations, either we'll look at alternate placement, we'll figure out a safe place for them to be, or we'll determine if they're going to be just fine at the general population shelter. Or just check in if they're in an area that we're not concerned about. We also want to be mindful of, say, evacuation routes. We don't have a whole lot of them to choose from, so that goes into our timing considerations. And then closing schools and being able to set up shelters in time to manage this as well. So we've got a lot of timing considerations that go into this. I already talked a little bit about that left visual, about how after the storm has passed, we may still have some storm surge concerns. Ian showed us that. And then the eye. So during Irma, I got to go outside during the eye, and they were right. This is the most beautiful sky you could have ever imagined within the eye. So it could be very misleading if somebody isn't really paying attention to this. It could look beautiful, and they could go outside, but then that other side of the eye is just as bad as what just came through. So be very careful. Don't think that, oh, it's over with, now we can do what we want again. So again, just the planning. So before the storm, having that supply kit, we'll talk through what some ideas for that are. There's a few things in our all hazards guide up here, as well as another supplemental document up there if you want some more about things that you can keep handy for these types of situations. We certainly, if applicable, checking in any insurance, even vehicles if you have a vehicle, making sure you select appropriately for your area, for your hazards, for your issues. Just check your insurance. Taking any pictures and elevating, even video, but make sure there's actually an app that you can download that has a timestamp. So it's not just a picture, you can even show I took this on this time and date, and do one both before and then after if you have any effects. That helps with any insurance issues. Check with the facility on utility guidance, what you should or shouldn't do if you are leaving. Have a destination and a backup. I've talked to a few people that they said, oh, we were heading to Orlando, but then all of a sudden the storm was heading toward Orlando, and now we were right back in the thick of it. So be ready for where you might have to go a different direction. Again, inform family of your plan, have that good communication, and have important documentation, which will be covered in these pop-ups. So of course, cash. Folks my age and younger don't understand this concept, but ATMs aren't going to work once the power and banks are power's out, banks are closed. So cash is king there. Having your ID is helpful, especially if we ever get in a situation where law enforcement is making sure you actually live here. You're not just wanting to see what happened. Drinking water, 1 gallon per person per day for drinking. That does not include any cleaning purposes. So factor in any other purposes you might need water. I always like to tell people, I wouldn't call it a joke, but people tend to chuckle a little bit. get food that you'll actually eat. Sometimes people get stuff that they're just like, oh. So that helps, one, where you're not as frustrated during the storm, but two, at least you're eating it over time and you're not allowing things to expire. So get stuff you'll actually eat. Medications, work with your doctor and pharmacy to make sure you've got adequate to get you by for a little while. Pets, of course, any considerations for pets, food, water, crates, carriers, shots, so forth. Batteries for anything that you use, don't just stop at flashlight. If there's any other equipment that you might use that takes batteries, you might want to have extra batteries for that. Have that bag packed like you're going on vacation. That way you've got it ready if you decide to go. Being mindful that if you do go to a shelter, they don't have beds, they have very limited cots, so a sleeping bag or something to make, don't bring in this massive air mattress, but make sure that it's something that's going to make it a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, fuel, we learned during Irma was a big challenge for the community, so I'd encourage you to have, if you've got the containers, don't wait until the storm's here, because then everybody's panicking at the same time, and then we're out of fuel, and it impacts the days after. So having that fuel ahead of time, a utility bill or some other form of residency beyond just your ID. Sometimes people don't update their IDs, so have additional backup to show I currently live where I say I live.
Mike,
Yes,
when you speak about having fuel,
yes.
what kind of containers, where do you store it so you don't blow yourself up? And
So great point, and if you have generators, we've got some generator guidance here, but make sure that you're running your generator in a well-ventilated area. I obviously keep my fuel in a place that's not inside and fumes and so forth, so I've got a few good-sized containers for fuel. It kind of depends on your needs.
I'm talking about automobile fuel. Where do you store that?
I keep it right in my garage.
You're not concerned about it blowing up?
You just don't want it near other things that are,
Don't put it next to your grill.
yeah, be very mindful about what's in its vicinity.
Okay, thank you.
What do you do with an electric car?
I'm not going into, that's a whole separate matter, so.
Good luck.
Anyway, so 311, again, you can look up what evacuation zone you're in. You can put in requests to the county through 311. If you do leave or if somebody else is checking in, you will have to call 239-252-8444, because if they dial 311, it's going to go to where you or they are currently, not to our 311. Okay? So right now, and there's a little bit of to-do in the state about Everbridge. Maybe some of you were woken up at 4:45 a.m. Stuff happens, and I won't get into that one too much. But right now, most of the counties use Everbridge, including us. Don't know what next year looks like for us. We have a decision to make, either to go along with whatever the state does, or maybe we'll stay with Everbridge. We're still determining that. But at least for this year, know that Everbridge is in place. We have had good success with it. You have some ability to opt in to what messaging you get. Now, I will warn you that tornadoes, watches and warnings will come to you. You cannot turn those off. We want those to get to you. That's not just a Collier County thing. Most jurisdictions do the same thing, where we do not want you to turn off tornado warnings, because those typically, especially the ones that harm people, happen during the evening hours while you're sleeping. So sorry, we're going to wake you up. Okay. Other local notifications may happen. It's based on how you are with Everbridge, so if you've just listed your residence, but you're at the mall, and something's happening at the mall, you're not gonna get the message, unless you have the app. So you can download the app if you wanna get messaging from us wherever you go. But otherwise, that message is only going to be tied to where you registered. So if you want more, I can talk to you more afterward about that. There are other ones like boil water notices and so forth that will send out some other information, but we really don't use it that often, fortunately. There's more information at alertcollier.com, that's where you can get registered. We are just in the process of hiring a new individual to help us with Alert Collier, so right now I'm it. And then 311 is, again, a place where you can get information about Alert Collier. Any questions on that? We also have a little pamphlet up here if you want. All right, so weather radios. I actually have one both in my office and at home, so even though some people might think that they're old and outdated, I still think that they're a good option to have. If our other technological systems go down, this is our fail-safe, our last-ditch effort to try to get information out. So that's pretty resilient. I've rarely seen where that system has been down. So I still encourage a weather radio in your situation. iPause I won't talk too much about, but FEMA has all kinds of ways to push information by traffic message boards and so forth. We can ask for an iPause if we wanted to, but traditionally that's done at the state or the federal level. 90.1 and 91.7 are our partners on the radio, so WGCU it is our close partner there, so that's a good place to get information if, say, the TVs are out or your internet's out. You can try that. Texting to 911, especially important if we're in some kind of violence scenario and you don't want somebody to hear you. You can text to 911 and it works just like calling 911. So the key here is like real estate, location, 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 especially if you're about to lose consciousness. If you at least tell them where you are, they've got some ability to kind of have a sense of where you are, but they may not know I'm on the 3rd floor. So make sure you text and say, this is where I am. They'll at least start sending folks, and then they'll start asking more questions to kind of dial back or determine what the best resources to send your way are. So if you're going to text, again, make sure you mention where you are. They cannot accept photos or videos in text message. It will not make it through to them. So it's voice only. If you choose a shelter, it's the lifeboat, not the love boat. So be prepared. It's enough to at least get people to survive. It's not meant to be luxurious. Bring some quiet toys and activities. Most of the issues that we have at the shelter are with other people there, not with the conditions, but with other people. So books and other quiet activities are much better than some other options that people tend to bring. Anyway, pet-friendly sheltering. We used to have pet registration through domestic animal services. That is no longer. And it says middle schools, but any elementary and middle school that we open as a shelter will be pet-friendly. Again, I don't know which shelters we're going to open for any particular hazard. Again, it's depending on what we have in front of us, but any elementary and middle school that we open will be pet-friendly, and we'll always open at least one, depending on how many people we're evacuating. Crate, food, water, medication, special instructions, etc., vaccination records, so forth. Question? Okay. Special needs shelter, I already talked a bit about this. This is for those that cannot safely stay in their home and have no other option available. A caregiver is strongly suggested to accompany. Again, the eligibility is based on primarily oxygen and electricity dependent. Transportation assistance is available, service animals are permitted, and then limited low sodium meals will be provided to folks there. Hazards after the storm. So any power line that you see down, assume that it's live. Try to find an alternate route instead of driving over that big old tree in the road. That's probably not a good idea. Don't get a ramp and try to jump it. I'm trying to mix in a little bit of humor. So then, if the traffic signals are down, use the four-way stop. Be kind to others that are driving around you. Don't, blow through. Be considerate. And then any water that you see on the ground, don't think that it's just like bath water. There could be some funky stuff in there. We did have some interesting organisms during Irma down in Everglades City that was in the water, so there can be some interesting stuff in the water. So do not try to stay out of it as much as possible, or have some kind of boots or something that's going to protect you from that. This just talks a little bit about some of the other hazards associated with storms, whether it's people that are working on their home, or people that didn't use their generators properly and have issues or even die due to carbon monoxide, electrocution, candle fires. So just be careful is what I'm getting at here. So candles, generators, again, well ventilated, only use outside and far away from windows, doors, air conditioners, so forth. So for debris, our solid waste tries to get information out about this, but the better that we sort, the quicker that we can get through. So if folks just throw out this big old pile and don't do any sorting, well, we're still going to have to do it. So we're going to have workers that are going to have to pick through all that stuff. So then people complain, why haven't you gotten to my house yet? Well, because your neighbors aren't sorting things, or maybe you didn't. So we're trying to get that message out about debris. Website, we do have a spot where if somebody gets damaged, where they can make their own report, and it goes to our system called Crisis Track. Even if we get duplication, that's fine. We'd rather know than not know, so you can do your own reporting if you'd like. After a disaster, we set up points of distribution, sites for distributing food, water, tarps, other resources depending on the situation. We set up these disaster recovery centers to help people with some of the FEMA documentation and getting plugged in for post-disaster assistance. And if you have questions, just shout. Okay. So we like to try to get people, one, to know that donations in cash are way better than having to deal with items. We'd rather be able to purchase through some of our partners some of the needs that are there through cash. We have a partnership with the Collier Community Foundation, and they work with a lot of the agencies, the United Way agencies that you see on the right. We ask you to kind of be considerate to work with our partners that we coordinate with, and not the ones that come in and we don't know them and they just do whatever they're going to do. We try to have some more process, some more idea of who's what. So again, our website, there's a lot of information that's on our website. We do turn our whole Collier County website over to an emergency page, so you can get information there. We're on Twitter, if you use Twitter, and on Facebook. It's just Collier County Emergency Management, if you wanted to look for us, or at Collier EM will get you there with either one. And that is it. So I think we have some time for questions.
When you call for a mandatory evacuation of like Zone A,
Yes.
how long would you estimate it would take to get to Orlando or somewhere out of
Depends.
this area?
A lot of the decision making also is not just Collier specific. So we also have at least the daily call and maybe some other informal calls with Lee County, with Charlotte County, and we talk and make sure we're coordinating this. We also have to talk to our cities, so City of Naples, City of Marco Island, and even Everglades City, where we have to coordinate and kind of make sure we're not messing up another county's approach. So if we're evacuating multiple counties, then your trip somewhere maybe a little longer if there's more people trying to leave. So again, if you've got any concerns about getting to a destination, just leave earlier. That's got to be a bit of your call that you have to make. We can only give you the tools and the information that we have. We cannot make decisions for each and every individual here in the county.
Through experience, I have found taking the roads in the center of Florida much better than taking I-75.
Yes, and yes, but I mean, if everybody gets that message, then everybody's going to go the same way. So
Keep it within this room.
we won't tell anybody. Yeah, so it can't hurt to think about where I might go if I was going north or if I was going east. That's what I would kind of focus on first, is north or east.
Right.
And have an idea of what roads are available to me beyond just 75, whether it's
301.
the alley or if it's the northern portion of 75. What are the other options if I don't want to take 75?
I got a more curiosity question, I guess, since it doesn't apply to us at all. I saw something, I think it was in Sunday's paper, about turning off utilities and things. And it said to leave the main gas line, if you have a gas line, leave that on.
So I don't work for Florida Power and Light, I don't work for water, wastewater, so I will never tell you what you should do. That's why I suggest you chat with them first.
Right.
And then whatever your utility providers are, what I would do, even working in emergency management like I do,
That's what I'm
I would
asking
call
you.
Florida Power and Light,
No.
I would call our utilities department and say, I'm leaving, what's your guidance on what I should do? Or to save them the phone call, I might do some research and try to find that information elsewhere.
So, and you're a skilled emergency management person. What harm would come from having a gas line to your property turned off as opposed to leaving it on? I mean, it seems counterintuitive to me that you wouldn't leave it on.
It's not necessarily about just the on and off, but other considerations around it. It's not just turn on, off. What else do we need to think about for my property?
Okay.
Each properties are going to be a little different, so
If you have a pilot light, you got a problem. If it's interrupted, it goes off, and then when it comes back on, your house fills up with gas.
also when you turn it back on, if there is storm surge, we saw where there were some fires that occurred. So it's not just about the turn off process, but it's also thinking about post-storm and when we're turning things back on. Any other? Yes, so afterward, just so you don't rush me while I'm still talking, you can grab some materials up here.
Thank you.
Yes?
If you do a mandatory evacuation, is it safe enough to go from A to, okay, come visit you in C?
That's where you want to know not just what evacuation zone you're in, but once you're leaving, are there other zones that have been evacuated?
Yeah.
So if we do A and B, but not C or D, then you could go, I could go to C, D, E, or F. Just know which zones have been evacuated.
And things like that.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So especially when we were dealing with COVID, we were trying to be careful about how many people were in various shelters. So with building code, again, hide from the wind, run from the water. So we don't necessarily need everybody to evacuate in every storm. That's why we use evacuation zones. So if you're not in an evacuation zone, if you're in a sturdy place, you should be fine. So we're trying to be careful about, we want people to leave, but we also don't want the wrong people to leave, because then it just gums things up and makes it more difficult to leave, to find a space, I mean, it's a cascading effect. So it's that really tough kind of back and forth. We want that messaging to be strong in the areas where people need to leave, but we also don't want to be so strong that people outside of that get nervous too, and now they're leaving and just making an issue for everybody now. It's tough. Yes?
I have one last, I did, sort of a rumor that's going around here in the community that Kalia being there and taking down mangroves to build it, and likewise the water came across. Our storm surge really didn't go, it came close coming up, but basically it came from the side, which is why our garages were damaged. Is that a story you've ever heard, Kalia damaged?
I have not heard that specifically, and the only thing I can say is that corny phrase, way above my pay grade.
Okay.
Way above me.
We're willing to blame them for our damage.
So, the one thing I want to end on, and I'm not done yet, you know, if you want to ask me questions afterward, I'm happy to answer questions. 99.9999999% of the time, this place is paradise. It's beautiful. I love living here. It hasn't scared me off. I hope it doesn't scare you off. We just have to be ready for the 0.00001% of the time that we're inconvenienced and have to potentially go somewhere else, or be ready to hang out and get through until it's back to, you know, the Naples and Collier County that we know. So I always try to temper some of those concerns about where we live, because this only happens every so often. So, you know, I love Florida, and I hope you do too, and we love our taxpayers, you know, so anyway, I just wanted to end with that. Anything else?
Thank you.